Okay, so now, are you ready to amplify BIPOC voices in the music industry? Yes, please, thank you very much. So, we have a great moderator here with us, Kenny Eshinlokun, and she's the founder of Taboo, and she will lead this panel together with Christine Kakaire, who is a creative database lead of Black Artist Database. Yes, we have more Elian, a musician of Fever AM. We have Camille Barton, the creative director of Emergent Boss, and Femi Oyewole, and he's the founding director of Black Brown Berlin. So please, come and rock up this stage here. I welcome you really warmly here. I leave you the stage. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. Everyone's shy. Cool. Yeah, so thank you for coming to this panel, where we'll be talking about amplifying BIPOC voices in the music industry. I'm Kenny from Taboo. I'll be your host, and I've got our lovely panelists. So I'll give everyone an opportunity to introduce themselves and your pronouns and a bit more about, yourselves. So shall we start from this side, Christine?
Thanks. My name is Camille Barton. I use they, them pronouns. I am a DJ. I go by DJ Afro Ankali, and I'm also the creative director of Emergent Bass, which is a club series, interdisciplinary event series, reconnecting to the Afro-diaspora roots of electronic music and underground club culture.
Hey, I'm Femi Oyewole. I am an octo person, which also means a multi-hyphenate, which also means a multidiscipline person. And I'm here because I'm one of the founders of Black Brown Berlin, which is a directory for black and brown people coming to Berlin or living in Berlin, of things to do. And we're also like a rich networks resource of just everything black and brown, basically.
Hi, I'm more Elian. Excuse me, I'm a bit nervous. I'm a DJ, producer, and promoter. I do a series of events in LA called Into the Woods, and also another event in Berlin called Fluid. And that's about it.
Hi, I'm Christine Kakaire. My pronouns are she, her. I'm a music journalist primarily, but not exclusively electronic music journalist. I also am a teacher, and I work as part of the collective behind Black Artist Database.
Okay, so I guess maybe we'll continue with you, Christine, and if we can tell the audience about how, what you think about, I guess, this new era that we're in terms of BIPOC voices being amplified in a different way than it was before.
I think to answer this, I could probably speak to the work that we do as Black Artist Database. It's an initiative that I joined around this time last year, but kind of emerged as Black Band Camp in summer of 2020 in the wake of the execution of George Floyd and the racial justice uprisings that came directly afterwards. So there was a need that was identified to really highlight and foreground and platform the diversity of talent within electronic music, particularly because there is this disconnect between the roots of many styles of electronic music and the people who benefit from it the most in this kind of modern day. So it was about kind of shortening that gap, and it's kind of expanded outwards into lots of different initiatives and programs that we're running.
And what exactly is the Black Database, for people that don't know?
Yeah, that's probably a good place to start. So it started out as a online shared spreadsheet, like a Google sheet. And this is at the time that Bandcamp, which I'm sure most people know, was started to run their Bandcamp Fridays as a response to COVID to give creators who are on Bandcamp an opportunity to earn an income without having fees that they needed to give to Bandcamp. So Black Bandcamp was kind of created as something to accompany that and to specifically highlight Black artists to really think about the economics of oppression and to think about how they operate within the music industry. So that started as a database, and that's kind of broaden out to just be kind of more of a multimedia platform, I guess you could say, about primarily putting money in the pockets of black artists, black and black identifying artists, but also to highlight things like the creative database, which is kind of my baby project, which is launching hopefully next week, which is going to be thinking about people like me who aren't musically adept, but people who are writers, photographers, graphic designers, people who engage in these kinds of conversations, and giving them a place to showcase their work and hopefully to kind of find strength within the community to fortify ourselves, to work towards wage equity, et cetera, et cetera.
Nice. And just, sorry to keep staying on you. I'm very interested, and I think a lot of people are too. But what kind of like barriers have you found by doing this? Or maybe you haven't found any barriers and that's loaded.
Oh, there's barriers. There are plenty of barriers, but I think, like one of my colleagues is here as well, in the front there, Oscar. I think not just barriers, but also kind of trying to occupy a space where we are part of this community and we want to have like a fertile and open dialogue with other members and other stakeholders within electronic music, but also having this question of, okay, we possess a certain amount of cultural capital that will go a long way for people who will align themselves with us, and kind of having to make these kind of judgment calls and to be able to work in a way that protects us as an entity and protects all of the black creatives that we're working with, but being aware that we're potentially working with people whose intentions are not as pure as we'd like them to be. So that's something that's a constant ongoing conversation within the collective.
Cool, thank you for sharing that. This probably gives me a great segue to Femi, because you've also got your own collective, Black Brown Berlin. What were your intentions behind starting that?
Yeah, Black Brown Berlin, I would say it's more of a, it's a for-profit social enterprise, basically. And though we're grateful that a lot of people do refer to us as a collective because of the work culture that we try to provide, you know. But your question was, sorry.
What was your intention behind starting? Mm-hmm.
The intention was to, similar to Christine, to create an information database for black and brown people who came to Berlin or was living in Berlin already, to kind of know where to go or what to do in Berlin. So equivalent to like a timeout, or yeah, I think if you know timeout, it's like a timeout for black and brown people specifically. That would be a good example. And one of the main intentions was that I was receiving so much stories from friends who are black and brown from different communities, and especially transgendered friends, and just stories of negative stories of abuse and in all kind of forms, and especially at certain venues and locations. So we just was like, well, wouldn't it be good to highlight spaces that were safer spaces, or trying to be safer spaces, without actually pinpointing or saying those spaces are bad, you know? So kind of making us like hopefully a trustworthy information database, which we're grateful that we are slowly becoming, or we are, and we're also loud. So, and I say that because we stand tall because we stand on the back of those who come before us, right? And so there's so many incredible organizations doing incredible things, and we work with them as well. And but I think what also attracts people to us as well is just that I'm a visual learner, so we are visually loud as well. We try to make sure we show the celebration of black and brown bodies in all different forms and all different stories, in as much marketing as we can. And we're still getting there. We also need money to do it. But I think that's an attractive quality I've heard from other people.
And how have you found connecting people? Because you're also a fellow Londoner, so we're not necessarily born and raised here, and I think finding a community can take a lot of people a really long time. And so how do you even get to connect these black and brown people?
Yeah, I mean, that's also another reason why it was created, just to find connections of people who look like me in all different perspectives. Fortunately for me, I'm a spiritual connector. I'm also a connector by nature. And so I think some of that bloodline came through into Black Brown Berlin, and we connect by just making ourselves present, and people contacting us, and like Lindy, who's great, just reached out to us, and we were like, yeah, sure. And or one of the things, you know, and this is like recognizing my privilege as a cis-heterosexual male, but going into spaces, especially white spaces, white offices, and white businesses, and be like, hey, you say you celebrate diversity, but when I'm looking at your images of your workspaces, I don't see anyone who looks like me, let alone anyone who looks like anyone of us. So what is that? And my question is just why? Just why? And then for some clients, it's like, yeah, we're working it. Some clients are like, oh, I don't know. We're like, well, we know people. Easy. So we use that to create a network so that we can provide also equity for Black and brown bodies to get in these spaces, and also these spaces can continue to diversify their talent. And then to answer your question specifically about connecting with Black and brown bodies, just word of mouth, friends, people. I work in the entertainment industry, so just that connects a lot of us. And then sometimes meeting people on the street, like, you know, like for
I know.
Yeah.
The black nod.
The black nod, you know. But I take it just a little bit further because I'm a network. I'm just like, I've seen you, who are you? Nice to meet you. Let's just connect on the internet, and that's it. Maybe something will come from that, maybe not, but just, you seem cool, you know?
Just actually for everyone, I think bringing up what you've just talked about in terms of representation visually, I think right now there's been a lot of campaigns around diversity, and now there is a lot of performative inclusion.
Yeah.
So how, you know, what do you think the best way to sort of combat that is? Because it's a bit of a, well, if you don't include everybody, you're not inclusive, and if you do include them, you're performative. And so, you know, what do you think is the best way to combat that?
I don't know the best way. I have a version that we are working on is that, yes, it's cool to have a lot of representation in the front of camera, but also who is behind the camera, and who is in C-levels, and who is, you know, who is part of the team in the conversation. So I think, yeah, that's like our focus, but we also support other people doing, like, leading on other focuses, and all of those focuses can hopefully give a bigger answer, do you know what I mean? But I don't have a particular best way, but you're right, there is a lot of performative. And like Christine said, it's also like when you're working with like certain clients, is watching who is actually consistent in what they're saying, and wanting to actually genuinely make some changes, or who is just playing into the moment right now. And then how do you call them out on that?
Yeah, I think like me and Christine had a brief chat yesterday, even the language around amplifying black voices as opposed to platforming, what is the right word? To amplify a black voice, they've got to be in the room to begin with. Go on, Christine.
Yeah, I'll try to keep this brief because I can really rant on this topic. Because for me, like, even though I work in music, language and words are my tool of trade. I'm a writer. So I'm really interested in the power that language holds, because it does hold power. Even though it's something that we all use and it's kind of unconscious in a way, but this is the first place where systems of inequality and oppression emerge, is through our language and through our body language. So I think even kind of thinking about the title of this and thinking about amplifying, it's like this idea of making an intervention at some kind of a public point. And it's like, as Femi said, I think the onus, and I hope that people feel encouraged to go away from these conversations and to be like, okay, we know what's happening at this public face, at this kind of performative space, but let's not be distracted by that. It's like, who is in the room when these decisions are being made about, okay, this is the year we talk about amplification. that's what we should be focused on. That's where our scrutiny should be. That's where our critical eye should be. So yeah.
Yeah. What about, did you want to have something to say more?
Particularly about this subject, I feel like it's more their space to speak on it.
I'll come back to you.
I'm here.
How do you navigate solidarity as an artist in the music industry? I know you've got a very, your background is not necessarily, let's say, particularly
Straightforward.
Yes. So I think it's a good way for.
What was your question? How do I navigate?
So how do you navigate solidarity in the music industry?
Just to touch very lightly on my background, my mother is from Yemen, my father is from Iran, I was born in Israel, I moved to the States at a very young age, a formative age, and I think personally for me, it's considering my privilege. I mean, privilege is something that it comes in different levels. It's multifaceted.
It's relative.
So you might be from a country where you're more privileged than another group of people, so you have to consider that. And when I lived in the States, I considered backgrounds that were less privileged than me in that context, and how I can show solidarity and inclusion. So there's several ways I've tried to demonstrate that. When I started the party in LA with my partner Jimmy. Now we're 3 people. I'm now less involved because I've moved here, but the party started from a need where we noticed that there were not enough Black American artists being booked in LA, particularly where I was living for a very long time. And it didn't really, it came from a really, and I mean this in a really genuine way, it came from a really authentic place of why this, and this person not being booked in LA. They're like a true originators of the sound, and from Detroit and Chicago and so on. And we had specific names that we really were kind of wondering and frustrating, like, how about we just don't do it ourselves? Opportunity came, a logistic opportunity came up, and then our lineups have been, I find, to be incredibly diverse. We've booked probably more Black artists than most promoters in LA. So that was something that we started in 2015. And on another context of my identity, my very complex identity, because it's just very long. I don't want to take too much time talking about it. I started another initiative in Berlin called Fluid, which is a party I do together with a Palestinian partner, Sami Zibak. And we do it with another partner, John, who's part of the agency I'm represented by. And the first party we did, we brought Palestinian artists and gave them platform to perform and have a show in Berlin, and something that they might have less accessibility to. So use our privilege in a way that can benefit them and give them platform. So this party was meant to, the agenda of the party, or the narrative, I'm sorry, also English is my second language, so I'm not like the most eloquent.
You sound great.
Thank you. That's why I'm like a bit nervous. I don't want to, step on any toes or say the wrong things. But we use our, obviously, again, privileges in different contexts. I'm less privileged than maybe another, a white European person, but I'm more privileged than a Palestinian person. So you have to measure where you can use your privilege to help an underprivileged person, a person that's less privileged than you. So the party's agenda is to bring in collectives or DJs or artists, musicians in the dance music scene, because that's kind of like our sphere. And give them an opportunity and a platform for exposure and a stage, and give them like a voice. So we did our parties at Ohm. We had some really great plans, but unfortunately COVID came and kicked us in the butt. So hopefully we're trying to pick it back up, and we're trying to work together and see what we can do to basically give platform. So that's I hope that answers the
No,
question.
it definitely does. It
Yeah.
sounds like really great initiatives that you're doing.
Thank you.
And I think it would be good just to tell everyone maybe some words of encouragement around when you started to do this. I guess there was a bit of a fear around how people would react.
Yeah, I was a bit concerned with my own privilege being on the stage because I was like, oh, I'm the only non-black person, and I didn't want to take away space from anyone, and I struggled with it a bit and had a lot of fear. And there's a lot. The thing is that when you put yourself in a certain, like you become outspoken, the expectations from you also increase. And I signed up for this, but at the same time, sometimes you get targeted more than people that say nothing or do nothing. So I was a bit like, is this the right thing for me? Am I taking space? I don't want to take space. I don't. So I spoke to so many of my wonderful friends of diverse backgrounds around me that are very consciously and very aware and active, and they were like, no, you have things to say, and I'm like, okay, well, I'll try. So
no, completely.
yeah, so that was kind of my fear around that. But I do have my personal experience as a, there's people of color. It's also a diverse umbrella. It's Middle Easterns, Arabs. I come from an Arab background, but I'm Jewish. There's different types of things under this diversity umbrella, and I have my own lived experience of being like a brown DJ in Europe. Like it comes in different levels, and again, like it's not everyone's experience is a bit different. I do recognize my privilege,
No, yeah.
So, but everyone has their own lived experience.
No, completely, and I think more so talking about when you started the parties in LA and Fluid, obviously thinking that there could be there was a risk, I guess, creating this space, taking a stand and creating this space. There's always a risk, and I think a lot of people are afraid to do it, and it's really great to see that. I guess everybody on stage is doing that, and it's just good for other people to kind of get encouraged by the great things that you're doing as well.
Yeah, I think we should. I think it's also important to. I think to allow people to make mistakes and learn and grow, and I think that this is the only way forward. Kind of like to allow growth. Yeah.
Definitely. So Camille, sorry you've been ignored, but we're going to bring you in. What are some of the intersections of embodiment, healing, justice, and systems change that you explore in your work?
Ooh, it's a big question because I wear multiple hats, so I have the kind of emergent bass and DJing realm, which I'll speak to in a bit. But I do a lot of embodiment research and thinking about how we can repattern systems like racism and other forms of oppression, but from an embodied level. So thinking about what that looks like beyond policy, but how we change how we relate with each other in our kind of daily interactions. I think in the context of the music industry, what's interesting for me is that growing up in a household with parents that were big music heads, I learned from a young age that so many genres we listened to had originated in the Black community or from Afro-diasporic communities. And yet those artists were consistently being undercut, exploited, removed from owning the rights to their music. So historically, just the whole industry has been structured in such a way where there isn't reciprocity for Black artists. And so kind of picking up on what was said earlier, I'm interested in this moment we're in where people seem to want to have a lot of images of Black and brown people and say, like, this is the answer, this is diversity. And for me, it's about, well, what does reciprocity look like? Not just financially, but also in terms of care, in terms of really honoring and telling the story of so many of these genres of music. And that's what we're trying to do, I think, with Emergent Bass, is really create a space in Berlin, which is seen as, one of the electronic music capitals of the world. And yet, most techno heads don't seem to understand that techno and house emerged in Black communities. well, that most other genres of electronic music emerged in black communities, and there's very little respect for that, and you see that that translates into who's booked or not booked, or who gets paid, the differing amounts they get paid. So with Emergent Bass, we wanted to create a club space in this city that was really tracing those roots and using archival processes to demonstrate, you know, the power of the GI clubs in West Berlin, for example, before the fall of the wall, which were bringing over disco, early forms of house, electro wave, which all kind of created the foundation for the techno capital that we see now. And yet this isn't really honored. So beyond having a few faces or a season of diversity, how do we really reshape the structures within the industry so that we can actually tell the stories of the origins of these music and honor the artists? And so I'm kind of interested in that and what that looks like in the different components of it. And yeah, how we practice care in a club space and really return to using collective dance rituals as a site for healing and for transformation, because that's what our ancestors have been doing with dance and with music. It's about healing, and I think, at least for me, that's something that can often get missed out in a lot of the kind of commercialized events industry, and that's something we want to kind of reconnect to with Emergent Bass.
How do you think is the best way to sort of to do that?
For us, we have different approaches. So on a kind of booking level, all the artists we've booked so far have been African heritage artists. We also think it's important to really make sure we have Afro-Deutsch representation, because something I noticed from living in Berlin for a few years is that many of us, I know we're all Brits, but it tends to be, I think, a lot of Black British, Black American people in the art scene in Berlin generally who get elevated, whether it's being booked, whether it's being given shows, and a lot of the Afro-German talent that has been here and doing work for a long time can be ignored or sidelined. So we always think it's important to have at least some Afro-German artists that we book, and also celebrating other Black artists who are living and working in the city as well. We tend to also want to kind of create space for people to use dance as a kind of therapeutic practice to kind of release, especially after the pandemic. There's so much grief and loneliness and things which are really still being, I think, floating around in our bodies, and we're not being given a lot of tools in the mainstream about how to kind of navigate all these things we went through. So we're kind of encouraging people who come to our parties to really try and use dance as a way to rebalance, to shed, to also celebrate and feel joy in the body, and to use that as a form of harm reduction. Because at the beginning of the clubs kind of reopening, there were quite a lot of overdoses happening, and I think that promoters also have a responsibility to be aware of the ways that our industry can support people to numb and to use substances to kind of disconnect, and the ways that that might increase in a time like this. And so thinking about, you know, do we have people like Sonar coming in and giving some harm reduction materials? Do we also invite people to think about the substances they're using, or how they could maybe use dance or feeling able to release in other ways to support them? So we're just trying to practice different strategies of cultivating care and creating a little bit more of an intentional container for a clubbing experience.
Cool, that sounds great. I think I've seen a lot of awareness teams. I mean, that's probably like a small part of like ways that clubs can take care of people, but I think that's something that seems like a really good and should be a staple part, especially as you said, coming out of the pandemic, where people use clubbing or taking substances to numb rather than, you know, finding good ways to release.
Yeah, definitely. I think awareness teams, I hope they become a kind of staple that people have. And yeah, also not just, again, as a kind of external thing, like, oh, we should do this, but thinking about how that reflects the way the club runs itself and the kind of relationships within the team, and then also helping to resolve conflicts maybe within collectives or within people running clubs as they come up, because that's something that happens, and we maybe need to grow our own strategies to kind of navigate through that a bit more gracefully, because cancel culture is not gonna save us.
No, definitely not. Actually, that's another great segue into a question for everybody, actually. I think for me personally, I think especially growing up in London, where it's a very like high, let's say, capitalist and competitive space, you do often find within smaller communities and even your own BIPOC community that should be a safer space, that there can be gatekeeping. And yeah, how do you think is the best way to sort of, break that down a bit and create a sense of community where people feel like there's enough space for everyone in an environment that has categorically, where there's not necessarily been before?
I think, I don't know, I'm just going to say it. I think that a lot of it stems from our economic system.
From what?
From capitalism.
Yeah.
As you were saying, the amount of competition we have to navigate and the intensity of that when you're in bigger cities like London. So I'm quite interested in the work that this collective called art.coop are doing. They're rooted in the US, but they're doing kind of global work, thinking about how as artists and creatives we can work towards building a solidarity economy. So working more as worker cooperatives, as collectives, thinking about community ownership of buildings, of land, and really, acknowledging the ways that maybe we have to change the ways we relate and share resource in order to have a greater sense of community, rather than like saying, we're a community, but then you have a few people who are doing deals with brands and getting loads of money from brands and then trying to pretend that, oh, but this is a space for everyone. That's not, it's not transparent, and it's something I was seeing a lot in London. And so I think, questioning how our resources affect us and how we could, where we are now, with the power that we have, kind of create slightly different ways of interacting, moving forward, and how we can build on that. And I think practically like owning our buildings or owning land and using cooperative models will be a really big help with that.
Yeah, just to add on to what Camille said about it being a consequence of an economic system, like often gatekeeping is a direct response to the perception of scarcity. And this idea of scarcity is a kind of byproduct of these kind of capitalist economic systems that we exist within. So I think being able to first acknowledge that, and again, I have to speak to my experience with Black Artist Database to find ways to work collectively, but to use that in a way. I feel like with every panel I talk about this one Indian scholar who came up with this concept of strategic essentialism. Oscar's smiling because he's heard me talk about it before. But just this idea of kind of using your marginality as the basis of which to kind of coalesce around ideas and to move with strength and to move collectively. And within that also having radical transparency, I think, is a real counterbalance to the kind of more toxic approaches of scarcity and gatekeeping. Yeah.
Does anyone else have anything to add to that?
I think on another level, I think there's also like I can only talk from our experience, right, from Black Brown Berlin's version of things as well, which is to, one of our missions is to make sure all perspectives are being told. So all versions of a person and all intersections, and all different because we're all multifaceted in all different ways, are being shared and told and celebrated just the same way as you're celebrating Beyonce, you're celebrating, I don't know, someone else who is, etc. So the hope is that with that representation, it opens doors for, let's say, maybe not focusing on gatekeepers within the community, but maybe gatekeepers from outside the community who only want to work with certain types of peoples, and because they think this is, I don't know, cool or whatever, but making sure like there's a representation saying like, hey, like all these different perspectives are just as important and valuable, and they need to be shared as well. And not each company needs to do all of the perspectives. That's also another thing, right? Just like be specific about what you're trying to do. But it takes away from kind of like the question, but it's just like another spectrum.
It makes sense. I think I've done quite a lot of panels around this lately, and one of the things that keeps coming up is, a lot of people who are the only BIPOC person in their company or in a certain space, they become that voice. So there's one black person, I was the first black woman in the record label that I was working at when I first started out in music. And so I was the voice for, you can imagine which genres, where they're trying to sign someone, they're like, yeah, come in, Kenny, like, yeah. And I was like, okay, cool, I'll come into this listening session. But at some point you start to realize that you're only there for these certain kind of genres or what you perceive to be where my voice, takes more space.
Yeah, this is something I've noticed a lot, is that people really tend to categorize kind of by how you look, what you should be playing, or what kind of style or genre you belong to. And a lot of times when they see a black artist, they expect them to play a certain genres, and a lot of people might have a hard time receiving a black artist playing like really quote-unquote white hard techno, for instance, just as an example, because they kind of put them in these boxes that, that doesn't really work with where I think how you should sound. So this is something that I've noticed a lot, that people subconsciously kind of label you by how your background, how you look, and like what you should sound like. And in Europe, for some reason, it seems to be a little bit more apparent that a lot of times there will be DJs playing a black genre, like funk or disco, for instance, and the white DJs tend to be to take a lot of the seem to be a lot more celebrated a lot more for playing more than the black artists, for instance. So this is something I've noticed a lot, that it's like a perception thing that needs to change. And like, how do you start changing that perception that everyone can play any genre, really, like that you're capable to enter spaces or genres that are more white, like if a black person wants to play metal, they should play metal, like it shouldn't necessarily be belonging to a certain type of race or look. So this is something that we need to work on as a perception that needs to break.
Yeah, I agree.
Can I just say something on top of that? Since I'm here, because I haven't actually said this out in public, but anyone from Berlin Music Commission is around and listening, I would love to challenge you on this term black music that is in Germany. And it's something I've seen being here. I'm like, why is that here? And I haven't had the time to focus on that fully. But since we're here, I just want to jump on what you were saying more, and just like, can we just, I just like to question the legality of black music and changing that term. So, Berlin Music Commission, let's have a conversation.
Great, I love that. I guess, definitely, black music to me anyway is any music that's made by a black person. So if we're going to umbrella it, it's quite difficult, and it will take over every single genre there is.
Exactly.
So I think it's good to try and change that. I think, I won't delve any more longer into that, because I could get into a tongue twister. I just want to open I want to open up to questions now, to see if we do have any questions. Okay, great, lovely gentleman at the back. I thought we were going to have it on the swap card, but we'll do it in the room. So I think your question was, how optimistic we are right now based on what has happened in the past. I don't know. I think I'm pretty optimistic, to be honest. I think the pandemic was horrible, but what it did, I can only speak for myself, was create a real sense of community. So I'm part of this organisation called the Black Music Coalition, and I sit on the independent arm, which is taking care of the independent music industry in the UK, but I live here. We kind of have meetings every week and talk with different labels around how the music industry can be more accountable for their treatment of black musicians and black executives. And the thing that I found from there is now I'm connected to the entire UK music industry. If I need an artist, I've got it. If I need a PR, it's there. If I need someone to book here, it's there. And there's a real sense of community, which is great, and has only kind of come out of the hardships. I think Germany has a long way to go, but I am hopeful that things can change. And I think, the more people come together and have these tough conversations and create communities and places where, we can make change happen, then the better it will be in the future.
Can I speak to it briefly also? I think I reflect the challenge that you and the concern that you raise. One of the pain points I think for me is that I think the club scene in Berlin in particular and in Germany more broadly is kind of this symbol of reunification, and it's kind of been a way to mask a lot of the ongoing inequalities that still exist here, of saying like, look how diverse we are, look how multi-culti we are, we have this amazing electronic music scene, this amazing club scene, not really wanting to acknowledge, the profiling that happens, the way that many black people, other brown people, Arab people can't get into a lot of clubs, the racism that happens when you're in the club, the amount of times I've been asked if I'm selling drugs when I'm in a Berlin club because I'm black, and that happening to lots of black people. So I think if this thing can be challenged around the idea of, club culture being a symbol of moving past all these issues of inequality, then we can really start to have some of the conversations about what needs to change here. But I think as long as that symbol is there unchecked, then it's kind of just this illusion rather than really looking at, the situation and the many things we could talk about that aren't on topic for this panel. So, yeah.
Does anyone else want to add to that?
Yeah, I was just going to... Oh, sorry.
No. I'm still thinking.
I was just going to say that... one is that we have to be optimistic, so we kind of have no choice because of systems. So I guess your question was how optimistic. We have to. There's no real choice really. And the second thing is, I was just going to say, it would be great also to hear from a person of German heritage and African descent about their experience and how optimistic they might be living here, because it's a different experience, right? But just to reiterate the fact, we have to be optimistic, and that's tiring as well, and I can only speak on behalf of myself and things I've seen and stories I've heard from others who are working behind the scenes hard. That's my mistake.
I think we have time for one last question. Okay, great, lovely.
Sorry for this, because we have another question that you cannot say.
Yes.
On the stage, I'm sorry. So we have a question in the chat, so I wanted to take the opportunity to ask to you guys. And in case you have further questions, please, because we still have a couple of minutes left, no worries at all. So the question we have from the chat, from Virginia, it is, can you guys comment on pop music by black people constantly being put into hip-hop at award shows? Example, Tyler, the Creator, Earthquake. So who would like to take the question? And I leave it to you, Kenny, to organize this, of course.
Yeah, go for it, Christine.
I don't know what my answer is, but in the teaching that I do, I teach cultural theory to music students, kind of relating cultural theory and popular music and encouraging them to write critically about music. And this is actually one of the examples that I use of Tyler, the Creator, and his discomfort at the categorization that he finds himself in. And there's so many different examples of this, of if you kind of do these comparisons of different artists. And this is not just a current phenomenon. This relates back to the early 20th century. Look up the history of race records if nobody's familiar with it, in terms of the language that's used to marginalise and kind of ghettoise black music. So yeah, I would encourage people who are interested in this to go back to the roots of Billboard, which I think started in 1890 something, and to look at the way that they use language to talk about black music, and that will tell you a lot.
Anyone else got any comments?
I was just going to say, it comes back to gatekeepers as well, right? The system of gatekeepers. I'll leave it there.
No, I'm intrigued. I'm not sure if I understand.
Yeah, I mean, so like, as Christine's talking about, like Billboard or other examples of like
the Grammys, all of these institutions.
He was able to categorize musicians,
exactly.
etc. Okay, yeah.
Similarly, the way that, you know, the category world music is used so frequently to just talk about any music that's coming out of a country that's not in the West. Like, it's ridiculous.
Or people calling African music just African music, but there's so many countries in Africa, and it's like, it's okay.
And so many genres.
There's
even
high
within Nigeria
life,
alone,
there's like so many different like types.
So I just want to make sure if we have further questions. Oh, here, I'm sorry. Yes, please, speak out loud, your question, please.
I mean, I can start if that. I mean, my company is a really baby company, but we work with a lot of brands and musicians to create bespoke partnerships. And as a staple with every single partnership that we do, we ask the brand to give back to or create some sort of CSR project around the race, gender, community, subculture, or whatever it is that the artist belongs to, so that a glossy brand partnership between Valentino and Kitty Smile can also end up helping the voguing community and black people in Paris, and not just be a completely like glossy, a kind of like a glossy, performative campaign. And this was something that Kiddy actually he helped me to sort of see the importance of that, because in every campaign that he does a lot of campaigns currently, and he makes sure that every campaign that he does, his community are involved in the realization of that campaign, and his community get something from it. And so when I started Taboo, I made sure that every single partnership, there was a conversation at the very beginning that this person is a queer person of color. So when you're going to work with them, are you also open to giving back to their community, and what can it be? And it's not about, okay, let's make loads of programs so that the brand is completely like overwhelmed and actually decides they don't want to work with them at all. It's just about maybe you're going to give a portion of yourselves to this community, and then that, therefore, this can just continue to do more and continue to sort of elevate and amplify voices. And that's kind of one of the ways in which I've decided to try and do that.
There is another question. I'm sorry, you wanted to say something on this.
Just quickly, I think progress is happening. If we think of it in a linear way, I don't really believe in linear time, but there are things happening. I think we could do a lot by looking at the past to see when the last trends and waves of black popularity or POC popularity were happening, and learn from that, and learn that at that time there weren't enough people getting their buildings, securing their spaces, making sure they owned things they could continue to grow sustainably. Because what happened in the 80s and the early 90s in the UK is you see a lot of this wave of black dance companies and organizations didn't manage to get those things sorted, and they kind of became lost into obscurity. They weren't able to make it sustainable. So I hope from this moment people find ways to use this wave to make things sustainable and create longevity so that we can continue growing in our communities and not being reliant on trends or the seasonal interest that might be just a seasonal thing. Who knows?
Yeah. There is a great question which is building on the note you made on amplifying voices, and as I was having problems to even say the word as I was announcing this panel. So I'm going to read this question. It is from Christine. How can the music industry amplify black voices in the music industry, especially in Berlin? By black voices, I do not only mean artists, but also black music business professionals. Black people are often invited into lucrative spaces to give panel talks, volunteer and give workshops, but not invited into long-term sustainable leadership roles. What would it take for black professionals to sustainably be included? Christine mentioned this essentialism approach. What other strategies could there be aside from creating your own network? So which other strategies can we have aside of these networks? I'm reading this question.
I don't know. I mean, I think, I don't know. I feel like this is something that I'm still figuring out. And to kind of go back to what was being said before about are you optimistic or not? And I've been thinking about it a lot. And I'm not optimistic because it's not my personality, but also I think I'm just a realist, but I'm finding a lot of strength and fortification through working collectively. But like, not to harp on the language thing again, but I'm going to. I think that if equity is truly the goal, we wouldn't be fretting over amplification, over diversity, over inclusion. If we are interrogating where the power is held in these institutions, even an institution like this, like Most Wanted or Berlin Music Commission, if we are interrogating who holds the power in those situations, then we're moving towards equity. If we're fretting over the language of things like diversity, inclusion, and amplification, we're just becoming completely distracted by the optics of performance, and that's not what I'm here for.
Thank you. Wow, yes, absolutely. We still have a couple of minutes. I want to give the chance to the audience if I missed anyone. No? May I ask a question? I'm awfully privileged as a host, and now I'm taking your time as a moderator to read the questions, and I still want to have a question, but I need this question. I think we were critical about this amplifying world in the announcement of this panel. What other suggestions, alternative, would you actually prefer for such a format, for such a session, in case you would be able to... No, in case you would like to... in case you would like to.
I think that's a good question. I think that question is, I would combat that with, when you are working for the next festival, to have some people in the room who you'll pay to have a conversation about that.
Okay.
Basically.
That's a good one.
I don't know if the word amplification was the issue, maybe, but I think it was more about the words that have been used before amplification. So I think I can only speak for myself, but I think amplifying is quite a positive word that has been better than some of the words that have been used before. But I just hope that we can get to a point where we're not having chats about amplifying black voices, because we don't have chats about amplifying white voices. So, yeah, I guess a lot of work needs to be done.
Mm-hmm.
I think also there could be a framing around reciprocity or redistributing power, because that's something that keeps on coming up, is really talking about power. And if we're just talking about amplifying a few voices, we don't talk about, as Christine and others have shared today, like who's not even in the room, how they could even get in the room, to have their voice amplified. So I think speaking about power is of interest to me anyway.
Yeah, just one other word to restitution, another word that we use a lot within BAD. Sorry, what was the word that you said?
Reciprocity. Or like power sharing. Yeah.
We often speak within BAD about restitution and what does restitution look like, what does restorative justice look like. So that's another, I think, important word to take away from these conversations.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you very much. Anyone else? I think we are good now. So I just wanted to make sure everybody was able to ask. Thank you so much. So Kenny, I let you give the last...
Thank you guys. I think you've been wonderful panelists.
Yes.
And thanks for making my job very easy by sharing all of the great work that you've been doing. Where can everybody find you and your great organizations? Should we start with you, Camille?
Sure. You can find the Emergent Base project at emergentbase.berlin on Instagram. We're going to have a website up quite soon with all the panel talks we've been doing and some of the archival work. If you want to find me personally for my various tentacle projects, it's Afroankali, which is AFROOANKALI.
You can find Black Brown Berlin online, and always blackbrownberlin.com. And through that you'll find me as well.
You can find Into the Woods and Fluid on Facebook, and we don't have Instagram because we can't handle too many accounts, so I can barely handle my own, so if you want to find me, just try. I'm not going to give my name.
Black Artist Database, just search for that. There's a website, social media. There's also Mixcloud and SoundCloud accounts where we have hosted conversations and DJ sets. And for me, you can just Google me. I have a website that I haven't updated for about 3 years, but you can Google and see the stuff that I've written online.
Great. Well, thank you very much, guys. I think
Thank you.
we're done.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks.
Thank you.